Today, we're getting into something that doesn't get talked about enough: how race, immigration policy, and constitutional protections intersect in the United States. Now, when we talk about immigration, we have to ask, who does the law protect? Who does it exclude? How has race shaped who gets to belong in America? And most importantly, who laid the groundwork for immigrant rights in the first place? Now, spoiler alert, Black Americans did. This class is about connecting the dots: how the civil rights movement changed immigration law, how the rise of crimmigration blurred the lines between criminal law and immigration enforcement, and how 9/11 reshaped modern immigration policies. And we're going to talk about something that needs to be said: how white supremacy has fueled division between Black Americans and Black immigrants, when in reality, the fight for civil rights has always been about securing freedoms for all of us. So let's get into it. Now, let's be very clear about something. Without the civil rights movement, many of the freedoms that immigrants-turned-citizens enjoy in this country wouldn't exist. Before the 1960s, immigration laws in the US were blatantly racist. And I don't mean subtle, I mean straight up written into law that certain races were welcome and others weren't. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, that was the first U.S. law to ban immigration based on race. The National Origins Act of 1924 created a racial quota system designed to keep America white by favoring Western Europeans while limiting immigrants from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But then the civil rights movement changed everything. Black Americans were at the forefront of challenging America's racial caste system, not just in voting rights and segregation, but in immigration law too. The same racial justice push that led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 led to the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which abolished racist immigration quotas and allowed more people from Africa, Asia, and Latin America to immigrate to the United States. Now, in other words, Black Americans fought and labored for a system that extended rights and freedoms, not just for themselves, but for everyone. But let's be real, this contribution is rarely acknowledged. Instead, we've seen white supremacy strategically pit communities of color against each other, as if Black Americans and Black immigrants are in competition for success, resources, or even recognition. And that division, that's by design. Now let's talk about the divide that exists between Black Americans and Black immigrants, because if we don't address it, we can't move forward together. Too often, we see anti-Blackness within immigrant communities and resentment toward immigrants from some Black Americans. But let's ask ourselves, who benefits from this division? Because the reality is, Black immigrants and Black Americans face the same systemic racism. We are all impacted by over-policing, mass incarceration, and economic discrimination. And when it comes to immigration enforcement, Black immigrants are actually deported at higher rates than other groups. So when we talk about civil rights, we're not just talking about the past. We're talking about an ongoing fight that includes all Black people, regardless of where they were born. We are not each other's enemies. White supremacy wants us divided, distracted, and in competition with each other. Because when we're fighting each other, we're not fighting the system that actually holds us all back. That's why we have to reject diaspora wars. The fight for civil rights has never been just about one group. It's always been about expanding freedoms for all of us. So whether you're a Black American, an African immigrant, a Caribbean immigrant, or part of any Black diaspora community, we have to move as one. Now, we've made progress, but let's be clear. The racism didn't disappear, it just shifted. While legal entry became more available, immigration enforcement started targeting specific groups, setting the stage for what we now call crimmigration. Crimmigration describes how the United States started treating immigration violations like criminal offenses, particularly targeting Black and brown immigrants. Being undocumented in the United States is a civil violation, not a crime. But over time, the government blurred that line, using criminal law to target immigrants, especially those from Black and Latinx communities. The real shift started in the 1980s and 90s with the war on drugs and mass incarceration. Then came 1996 when Congress passed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, which made it easier to detain and deport immigrants, even legal residents. And let's be real, Black immigrants got hit the hardest. Black immigrants make up less than 10% of the undocumented population, but they are twice as likely to be deported for criminal convictions. And Latino immigrants, who make up only 18% of the US population, make up 75% of all deportations. So when we talk about crimmigration, we have to talk about race, because the laws aren't just about who's undocumented. They're about who gets criminalized in America. And after 9/11, that criminalization got even worse. After September 11th, immigration policy shifted from being a civil issue to a national security issue. That's when the U.S. government passed the USA Patriot Act, which increased detention and surveillance of immigrants, created the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, making immigration enforcement part of the national security apparatus. And they started targeting Muslims, Arabs, and South Asian communities under the guise of counterterrorism. And for Latinx immigrants, border security ramped up. Deportations skyrocketed, and family separations became standard practice. So we've seen how race has shaped immigration policy from the beginning, and how Black Americans' fight for civil rights expanded freedoms for everyone. But we still have work to do, and we need to start asking real questions. Should immigration violations even be treated as crimes? How does race determine who gets labeled as a threat in immigration law? What would real immigration reform look like if it were centered in racial justice? And most importantly, how do we stop letting white supremacy divide us and start fighting together? Now, y'all know I love to hear your thoughts, so drop them in the comments. That's it for today's class. Check the reading list for more on crimmigration, immigration reform, and the role of race in immigration policy. And I'll see y'all next time.